The world is becoming more diverse. The question is, are we, the people of God, becoming more united? I'm Alex Diaz. Welcome to Mosaix Today with Rachel and Mark. On each episode of this podcast, you'll discover unique insights, hear from credible practitioners, and learn promising practices to help you build a healthy, multi-ethnic, culturally intelligent, socially just, and financially sustainable church. The kingdom of God is not segregated. Why on earth is the church? And now, here's your host, Rachel and Mark.
Hello, and welcome to our latest episode of Mosaix Today with Rachel and Mark. I'm one of your hosts, Rachel Gilmore, here with Mark DeMoss from Mosaix. How are you doing, Mark?
Great. Good to be with you again, Rachel.
Awesome. It is good to be here. And oh my goodness, after our last podcast where you were talking about disruption and introducing the three teams or three legs of the stool, it just got me super fascinated, curious. We have lots to discuss from, my experience as a church planter on a smaller scale for my time in Virginia Beach, and yours there in Arkansas. So let's really dive in and look more in this episode at how we can leverage church assets to bless the community and to generate sustainable income. All right, Mark, so much to talk about. Holy moly, where do we begin?
Yeah, well, let's begin with just a quick recap. Last episode, we talked about the disruptive model. We talked about the concept of disruption in the business world, how that applies to the church, and particularly the 21st century, moving away from a one-dimensional spiritual game to creating a social game and a financial game, much like an American football team. Offense, defense, special teams, spiritual, social, financial, three teams functioning synergistically as part of your one church, not only to advance mission, but to generate sustainable income and keep your mission going forward into the future, and for the sake of the credibility of your witness and the gospel. Now, today, what we're talking about is just the third leg of that three-legged stool. So the financial leg, that is church economics. And my colleague Harry Lee and I wrote a book for Baker in 2019, published in October, just before the pandemic, called The Coming Revolution in Church Economics: Why Tithes and Offerings Are No Longer Enough and What You Can Do About It. And you can pick up that book and go more in depth. As we talked about last time, Rachel, I know listening to me on these issues can be like drinking from a fire hose, because there's so much nuance and so much understanding, as particularly in a podcast, to get it all in, very difficult. But just a couple key principles of why tithes and offerings are no longer enough and what you can do about it. The reason tithes and offerings are no longer enough has to do with a number of factors. So, for instance, generational shifts in attitudes towards giving. In fact, most income, nearly 80% of income given to the church today, is done by people born before 1964. And it's not just that people born after 1964 don't have income. It's they don't see giving and finances the way people born before 1964 do. And again, I could go deep into that, but that's one of the reasons. Demographic shifts is another reason. As the country, it becomes increasingly diverse, moving away from a majority white culture to Black, Brown, Asian, etc. By 2042, 1 in 2 people not white. Even today, 1 in 2 young people under 20 are not white. 43% of millennials are not white. That browning, if you will, of America also impacts the economics of the church. How so? Because of historic inequities and wealth gaps and income inequality in this country. So, for instance, if you're pastoring a church, in our mentality in the 20th century, the more people that join your church, it makes you money. Well, as the country becomes more brown, so to speak, the more people that join your church, it could actually cost you money. Or another way to think about it is 4 white people in a church compared to a Black, white, Asian, and Hispanic, 4 others in a church. Generally speaking, you'll have more income from those 4 white people than from 1 Black, 1 Asian, 1 Hispanic, 1 white person. And therefore, instead of just getting 4, it's going to take you 8 to replace the giving of the 4. And that's going to cost you money. In business, that's called customer acquisition costs. That's why pastors are like hamsters on a wheel chasing this thing, and they're not going to be able to catch up. Those are just a couple of the sociological reasons, but there's theological ones as well. And let me just take a break right there and give you a chance to respond.
Oh my goodness, this is great. I love that you're unpacking it. And it's a good reminder, I work and coach some church planters and they're like, oh my goodness, my numbers are going up, but my giving isn't going up. Why? And I said, well, how old are they? And if they're not churched, if they never even grew up in a Christian framework, the thought of giving or even like tithing is so foreign to them that to me, it's sometimes a good indicator if your giving is really low compared to your anchor or mother church, because it shows you're reaching people who truly have never been connected to a faith community. So everything you're saying is true. And I'm also going to throw in, I love that you're sharing this because I work with some church developers who help set benchmarks or metrics for planters who are trying to do multi-ethnic or ethnic communities. And you're right, sustainability takes longer. Giving is different. And so to really realize that and to say this shouldn't deter us from the work and the mission, but it should, inspire us or motivate us to really think innovatively outside of the box, because these churches, like you said, are the way of the future, because America is becoming more and more diverse and we need to create faith communities that reflect what we look like as a nation. So all of this is great. Loving it.
Yeah, absolutely. And not just that it's becoming more diverse, but another sociological factor is the increasing animosity in this country to the American church and to Christianity in general. And so what does that look like in terms of economics? Well, what if your county decides to begin taxing your property? That's already happening in the state of Pennsylvania. Churches in the state of Pennsylvania are taxed on all their property except for their sanctuaries. Right? That's happening in Connecticut as well. What happens if the federal government decides to take away tax exempt status for the American church or for Christianity, Christian organizations? That could happen. Now, in terms of property tax, I would say that's probable at some point. In terms of losing tax exempt status at a federal level, possible. By the way, that's not a birthright for the church, folks. That was given roughly early 1900s in recognition for the social justice, essentially, and the compassionate good that churches were doing for the society, creating hospitals, feeding the poor. And that takes a financial burden off of federal government. Well, if they don't see us doing that and we're not, then people are saying, well, why are we giving them a tax break? What if you lose your tax exempt status? What happens to your giving? You see, we are completely unprepared for that. So you have sociological factors, the potential of tax interruption in terms of taxes and what the government or counties might do with that going forward. And then, but I'll tell you, the biggest reason to pursue this, though, Rachel, is not for all the negativity that is, it's for the positive. The Word of God tells us to be good stewards, right? And stewardship isn't managing what you've been given, according to Luke, to the story and Matthew of the folks, you know what I'm saying. Let me start over. But one of the biggest reasons to do this, though, Rachel, is not just for the negative consequences that could be coming with generational shifts, demographics, even the federal government or local governments getting involved. But we have to think about this as a stewardship issue. This is a biblical issue that we have not been doing well with. What do I mean? In the story that Jesus tells about the good stewards, faithful good stewards, right? Remember the story? Good stewardship is not managing what you've been given. It's leveraging it to get even more. Remember the guy says, you gave me 5, here's your 5, and I made you 5. One guy says, here's your 2, and I made you 2. And what does the master say? Well done, good and faithful stewards, right? One guy sat on his asset. He buried it in the ground in fear. I'm afraid I'll lose it. I'm afraid maybe the thieves will stay. And in fear, not faith, but in fear, he buried that asset. And the master says what? Wicked, lazy steward. Take that asset away from him and give it to the guy with 5 because he knows what to do with it. The American church today is literally sitting on billions and billions of dollars of buried assets in the ground, sitting on our assets, right? Buildings that sit empty from Monday to Saturday. And that was even before COVID. Land that churches own, just sitting there doing nothing. It's a church of 65 members with a $2.5 million endowment in the bank. Nobody's getting saved. The community's not being engaged. But by golly, every one of those 65 people will tell you how proud they are to have $2.5 million in the bank. Wicked, lazy church. In terms of economics, we have to leverage those assets to bless the community and sustain our mission going forward for the sake of Matthew 5:16.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how many churches and pastors I've talked to who are just heartbroken because their church is sitting on all this endowment money. They could do so much. And they said, no, I just want my funeral to be in the sanctuary. So I'm just going to keep these doors open so that when I pass someday, I can be buried in the church I built, right? Instead of God's church and God's kingdom. And when we embrace this out of the box, this new shift for church economics, it can make a huge difference. I know we're going to focus and unpack more of the leg 3 and the church economics here, but I know when I was planting a church, gosh, it was the day before we launched public worship, I found out I was pregnant with my second child. And I said, okay, so now my husband and I are both clergy. We have 2 kids under 3 years old. I can't afford childcare. It was literally in the state of Virginia at that time. And even now, I think childcare is more expensive than in-state college tuition. And so I said, it would actually be more beneficial for our home economics for me to just stop working. And I said, what if I don't just think about me, but I start going to the community to see if others are really struggling with this, and they were. So our church, before we had a building, before we were self-sustaining, 18 months into our existence, raised $40,000 and used it to renovate the education wing of an existing church, a brick and mortar church. We're meeting in a theater, right? But I knew this church because it's where I was confirmed as a kid. And I knew the building was empty every day of the week. And I said, listen, let's fill your building with children. And they were gracious and said, we'll just charge you $1,000 a month to use the entire education wing. So we could start a nonprofit preschool where people's tuition was based on their income. So some folks paid 5% of tuition, 10%. Others paid 100% because they could afford it. And the staff was really diverse. I hired a Greek Orthodox woman to run it who was super passionate. And in the first year, we weren't expecting to make any money, but we made $40,000, and we were able to pour that back into children's ministry for the church. And I think 80% of our baptisms that year came from preschool families who were part of our mom's Bible study, who realized the ministry of this church and didn't have a church home, had never had a church home. There were parents and kids being baptized together. So for me, it was just a really powerful reminder early on in the life of the church that when we think outside of the box, when we don't sit on our assets, right, but we multiply them, that God can do really, really great things through that. So, we ended up adding a whole other campus of this preschool, which we then sold to a nonprofit who could take it farther than we could, because it's not just about the control and the money and whatnot. It's about impacting that community. So yes, that was one of the many lessons I learned about how we can fund our ministry in really powerful ways and help us live out our faith in the community. So yes, This is all good. Loving it.
Well, it is. And what you're talking about, many churches, I don't want to say many, but there's a lot of churches that maybe a preschool, they played around with this, but they don't understand it as a strategy. They don't understand it it's like a one-off thing. Oh yeah, we have a preschool and we make $50,000 a year, but they don't understand it in terms of stewardship. They don't understand it in terms of a comprehensive strategy to bless the community, generate sustainable income, keep your church going, and practice Matthew 5:16 in the process. And that's what church economics is all about. And again, the book 2019, The Coming Revolution in Church Economics. So you're bringing up, Rachel, in this some practice. So let's talk about practice, right? Get away from the theory and all that and the why, but to the practice. It's about leveraging your assets, right? So what are the assets of a church? It's people, money, and buildings, right? Or land, facilities, what have you. You people are an asset. The people that you have in your congregation, money, not just money that you might have in the bank, but the ability to aggregate money quickly. If I'm starting a business, who am I going to go out and ask to invest in me? But if I'm sitting in front of 100 or 200 or 500 or 1,000 people, I can aggregate money quickly. So it's not just money in the bank, but the ability to aggregate the people, the networks, et cetera, the money side, and then also, again, your facilities. The simplest way for a church to practice these principles is to rent space in their building. It's simple from a financial standpoint. It's good stewardship of that asset. And so for what does that look like? In this church I'm working with currently in Missouri, just got a situation where we can take an unused space or very underutilized space and rent it to a community partner that's doing good things for the community, pick up $2,500 a month. That helps to lower the burden on their mortgage payments, right? In our case, it took me 12 years. So if you're listening, I've been there, done that as a church planner. I was 10 years in a rented space on a month-to-month contract, sweating it out every month. So what I'm about to tell you, don't think, well, if I had that building, I could do the same thing. No, if you can't do it with a ball, you can't do it with a building. So the point is, now today, we have 100,000 square foot Kmart. Took us many, many years to get it. I took 50,000 square feet, brought in a suburban fitness club because I charged them only $2 a month, $2 a square foot. That's $8,000 a month. It covered my $7,400 mortgage payment. And it created 20 jobs, 6,000 people joined in an impoverished community of 30% poverty because the low rent means just $10 a month, no contract. But for us, we're not giving the space away. We're paying our mortgage, right? So I'm not trying to make top dollar, but I got to make something, and I want it to make sense. And mostly what I want to do is recapture what would otherwise be expenditures from tithes and offerings going to banks or to brick and mortar, and to repurpose that for true ministry in the lives of people and in this community, right? I took a dead space, just another quick example. Right before COVID, there was a woman married to a guy on our staff. She'd been a massage therapist for 17 years. I took this dumpy 650 square feet area in our church, just sitting there doing nothing. And we spent $12,000 of church money, and we built out a 2-room massage therapy studio. And we put her into her own business. It was her business. We did what's called tenant improvement. We did the improvements for the tenant. And then we wrote a contract, $500 a month. That's what we would make in rent. Now, in theory, 24 months goes by, we get our $12,000 back, and now we're making $500 a month, right? I got a 5,500 square foot grocery store in that's going in at the end of this year in partnership with Carlos Dansby in the NFL, a former football player in the NFL. That too is going to bless the community. In this food desert that we're in, that's going to feel like a Trader Joe's. It's also going to create jobs, generate tax revenue, and put money back into the church long-term on a 10-year contract with 3 5-year options. So I can go on and on about how to do this and why churches need to do this, again, to advance their mission, find credibility, gain sustainable income. Best way to get in touch with us, of course, is mosaix.info on our website. Set up a call. You can read Disruption, the book. You can read The Coming Revolution in Church Economics. But if you want our help, expertise, coaching, what have you, which we do for churches all over the country, just hit me up at mosaix.info. Be glad to talk about that more.
I love that. I love everything you're sharing. So a quick question that pastors might have that I heard, from seminary on is, oh my goodness, if I do that, if I let a gym or a massage therapist or whatever come utilize my space, it'll jeopardize my nonprofit status. And now we'll have to pay taxes on everything as a church. Is that true? How do we avoid that? What have you experienced? Yeah,
great question. You will not lose your tax exempt status on any of the things we're talking about if you play by the rules. To play by the rules, make sure you have a good lawyer or tax accountant, right? You got to get professional people involved to help you think it through, particularly in your own county or city, because there is federal law, but then there's local law. So you have to be in compliance. But there's basically 2 rules. Here's the deal. The IRS allows, it's in their regulations, a nonprofit, which includes a church, can in fact own or start a for-profit business. That's totally allowed in the government. But again, you got to play by the rules. What are the 2 critical rules? Number 1, whatever that business is, let's just take a coffee shop. Your church starts a for-profit coffee shop. It's under the umbrella of the nonprofit. So you have a nonprofit church, and underneath it, direct line down, is an LLC. It's a coffee shop that the church owns. You're allowed to do that, as I said. The first rule is this: whatever taxes any other coffee shop in your community has to pay, you have to pay as well. You can't leverage your nonprofit status and create an unfair market, if you will, right? Because I could lower costs because I'm nonprofit, and that hurts people that are doing it for profit. So you can't do that. So whatever the business is, you have to pay taxes in association with that business, like any other, in this case, coffee shop would in a community. The second rule is this: if you, in fact, at the end of the year, make net profit. So let's say you have a coffee shop and you make $20,000 net profit on that coffee shop. You have to return the $20,000 to the budget of the nonprofit, like in a case of a church. In other words, I don't know, maybe you have 5 leaders on an elder board or something, or deacons, and you say, hey guys or gals, we made $20,000, and since there's 5 of you, every one of you is going to get a $4,000 dividend or $4,000 bonus this year for serving on our deacon board or our committee or whatever, right? You can't do that. You got to take the net profit, and it has to be returned to the budget of the for-profit. You play by those 2 rules, no problem at all. Again, get a good lawyer, get a good tax attorney, or check in with the ECFA. They can tell you all about the Evangelical Council for Financial Accountability. But the fear is in the fear itself, because people have figured this out. It's allowable by the government, play by the rules, and it won't be an issue.
I love that. And I love this reminder that we should be using our church assets strategically. I know a lot of churches post-COVID are feeling that plateau or that decline in attendance and involvement. So instead of trying to hold on or sitting on your assets, how can we free those up? How can we give them back? I come from a Protestant tradition, the United Methodist Church, which has tons of real estate all over. That's probably the one thing we do have in abundance. And yet, when I was planting a church and meeting in a theater and in a warehouse, there were a lot of churches that were like, some welcomed us in to utilize their space, but a lot of them became very defensive. And when God opened the doors for us to merge with an existing church so that they could have more people and, young people especially, and we could have that, the security that comes from having a home and space to grow in. For me, as I drove around the city just praying, I was like, okay, Lord, first of all, I want a church with no mortgage, right? Because that would free us up financially. And then I want one with space to grow and to bless the community, and one that would help us have an external source of revenue. And we found this really beautiful property, really incredible church. God moved in mighty ways there. But, some of the criteria was that they didn't have a mortgage. There was a parsonage that we could sell and have all that money to use to update the church and make it more family friendly. We had a football field in the back where we could do upward sports and give back to the community in that way, because there was no upward program anywhere on that side of town, which was near some more diverse and underprivileged neighborhoods. There was a homeless camp living on the property, and there was a cell phone tower there that brought in $70,000 a year just to have a cell phone tower on the property. So it was just a really remarkable opportunity for us to get to know folks and utilize our space. When it came to our building and our property, we had people experiencing homelessness living there, and yet it gave us an invitation to sit on the city board for advocacy for the rights of people experiencing homelessness, and to run the vigil every year, which was like the memorial funeral service for those experiencing homelessness who had passed away. So, it really helped us grow, impact others, share our story, live out our faith. And we embraced the tradition where the week of Christmas every year, they would come and stay with us. So Christmas morning, we were eating breakfast together, opening presents together. And it changed our church for the good, because we were not sitting on our assets saying, how can we give back? But then how can we have businesses and organizations fund all the food, fund all those Christmas presents, so that it wasn't only on our church. We could share that ministry with our neighbors in the community as well. So I love what you're sharing. It's super practical. It's scary when you hear about it at first, and yet you obviously see the massive impact that you've been able to have in Little Rock, embracing these methods. And I had it on a smaller scale in Virginia Beach. I'm hoping to do the same thing in Phoenix. I'm super proud. The church I'll be planting out of is right in Roosevelt Row in the arts community. And when COVID hit, the Phoenix Theater, which is right next to the church, said, what do? We can't do indoor performances. And so Central United Methodist Church leased out their courtyard space, and they built this gorgeous outdoor theater, seating, everything. So for the last year, they've been in partnership together. It's helped the church keep their doors open, helped the theater keep their doors open and offer shows. And every night when I walk the dogs by the church, I hear they're doing a Frank Sinatra play right now. So it just sounds great. And you see the lights and the church is alive because it's in ministry with its community. So this is good stuff. Anything else we should know or do? Or obviously we can reach out at Mosaix@info if we want to talk, if anyone wants to talk to you directly about this and resources you offer. But any final parting words of wisdom for this podcast?
Well, yeah, they're not my words. They're the word of God. Matthew 5:16. Let them see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Folks, the 20th century was about explanation. The 21st is about demonstration. You have to lead with demonstration to gain credibility to explain God's love for all people. We do that good work by creating a disruptive model, building healthy, multi-ethnic, economically diverse churches, advancing social justice and compassion and mercy under a nonprofit alongside in terms of your model. But on this economic side, creating jobs, repurposing abandoned property, all the things that Rachel was just talking about. This is what gets the attention of the lost and the disenfranchised. It's not me with a Bible preaching Jesus. It's me doing good work. Matthew 5:16. That then pitches their attention to the church, and then they give glory to God because we're able to say, look what God has done. And this is the compelling witness in the 21st century. We've got to base what we do on Matthew 5:16, doing these good works, and economics is one of those three legs of the stool that'll help your church do that.
All right, guys, so go and do likewise. Let's live it out. Let's make a difference for the kingdom. Thank you so much for joining us today, for being part of our listening community. Make sure to follow us, subscribe, tell us what you think, tell us what other topics you want us to address, who you want to hear from, who our first guest should be in season 2. But ultimately, we are grateful for you. We are honored that you're with us. Join us in 2 weeks for our next episode of Mosaix Today with Rachel and Mark.
You've been listening to Mosaix Today with Rachel and Mark. Take a moment to leave a comment, and subscribe to this podcast. To learn more about who we are, what we do, and why, visit mosaixtoday.info. That's mosaixtoday.info. I'm Alex Diaz. We'll see you next time on Mosaix Today.